This is the NT-EV podcast. Bonus bit.
So Peter, I just wanted to find out your love affair. What got you involved with getting into battery electric vehicles as such?
What got me into it initially was we had one car that, years ago, this is 16 years ago, we had one car that was due for replacement, and it was the car that never left town. And I was looking around at, what I could buy that would be cheap and secondhand and reasonably efficient and so on. Didn't come up with anything much that was very good, but then started finding various people who'd had done conversions and described it all, EV conversions, and had described it in great detail in various websites. And so I'd done a little bit of hobby electronics, so that kind of was enough for me to think, I reckon I could do this. All of the people who had done a conversion seemed to start out with saying, I'm not an auto engineer, I'm not an electrician, but here's the car I converted and it's working fine. So I thought, okay, this is doable.
You're doing conversions as such. Here in the Northern Territory, we don't do too many conversions as I see interstate. They do a lot in terms of converting.
Well, what I'd say just on that is, doing conversions was a good thing to do 15 years ago, and I'm very pleased that I did it back then. But that was really only the start point for us. I wouldn't now recommend anyone to do a conversion unless they're just looking for an interesting project. Now I'd say if your aim is just to get an electric car of some sort that works, go out and buy one that's been produced by a car manufacturer. It isn't 15 years ago it was the only way to get one, but not anymore.
Excellent. And what got you into AEVA ACT? Because I know I talked to Bill Grisham as such. He was telling me how it all sort of formed back in 2008. I just want to see how you got involved with it all and how you put your hand up and getting involved as such.
Well, I went along to the second meeting that Bill and another guy had organised, and I only knew about it because they wrote a letter to the local paper to say, hey, we've started this EV interest group, but this is where we're meeting. So I went along to the second meet, and at that second meeting, there was someone at the end of the meeting who said, well, we're talking about these conversions. I've got mine out in the car park. Who wants to have a look at it? And he drove around the car park, and it was clear that, this definitely works. So at that stage, it was just a meeting that had been formed from people with an interest in EVs. And it was just at an opportune moment for me because I just started reading a bit online. And it was, we then had quite a few more meetings before, after about 6 months or so, I think there was then a discussion about, well, do we want to join in with either what was then ATA, which is now Renew? Do we want to be a special interest group within that? Or did we want to join another sort of local environmental group and be an EV interest group within that? Or do we want to start up an ACT branch of AEVA? And everyone decided that, the last of those was obviously the most sensible option. And so then we got in touch with the national body and became the local branch.
No, that sounds very exciting because, as you know that AEVA non-territory has just recently gone, now that we started to have our own branch now going forward, it's always good to listen to what everybody, how they started off and how they're going through with their journeys and that. And I think you guys got a fair few numbers now over in with AEVA ACT now.
Yeah, I think we've got a couple of hundred members or thereabouts.
Wow, that's what Randall Jones, our chair, would love to have 100 people right now. So we're trying to do a lot more stuff next year and driving the membership as such. So we'd love to get some tips from you guys to see what we can do and try to drive those numbers up.
I guess word of mouth is one way. We do keep trying to push the local car dealers to say, hey, give out our cards, encourage people, you've just sold an EV to someone, tell them to join AEVA. And they just are not interested. We've had, not me personally, but others of our members have tried repeatedly with the car dealers, and they just don't seem to want to do it.
Yeah. Did you hear about what the Norwegian experience? They said that trying to give, I think when they're at the actual nationals in Perth a year ago as such, they thought about maybe giving out an AEVA membership for 1 year for free with the car dealers and try to form that relationship.
Yeah. Now look, we heard them make that suggestion, and I don't actually know for sure whether that has been put to some of the local car dealers. But yeah, they've generally everything we've tried, they seem to just not pay it much attention. I suspect that they're really paranoid about being seen to endorse anything that's not utterly under their control.
We have a different perspective over here, because a lot of the dealerships here have actually come in joined some of our EV meets and greets and that sort of stuff. So we're quite more friendly up here. So I do find it a little bit different, disappointing, maybe just in terms of trying to get them on board as such. I think the sales staff, I guess, the people, the organization, I guess, it's got to be in the whole picture of things and understand what's going on, I think. And if a salesperson that I've spoken to understands, about electric vehicles, that you're halfway there sort of thing.
Yeah. I can only speculate why you might have a different experience. Perhaps being a bit further behind, the dealers, might think they need a bit of help from AEVA, whereas down here, I think they probably think they're doing just fine on their own, and can't see that they really need us.
I think when we come into things, I think it's all about trying to understand if someone's going on a long journey, you've got to make sure you got the right cables going along, and just knowing just the basics. And we always want to have these info packs that we're trying to look at doing eventually, so that way they can just go onto the QR code and look at what's out there. Because, a lot of the stuff right now with all the passenger vehicles that's out there on our website, on our AEVA website, showing just each and every vehicle is already there, was what you need to have and what you need to know about them already. So,
all those sort of resources are great. They're good for the car dealers. They're good for anybody, really. They're certainly always worth pointing out. One of the other things that's sort of been curious in our experience here is we've, about every 2 months, we've been running a course called, initially we called it Know Your EV, and we've just sort of decided to change that to all about EVs. But essentially it's for new and prospective EV owners, and we take them through all the basics of home charging and how to plan for a longer trip. And, or some of the quirks to watch out for with different apps from different charging providers, and some of the useful features that some have that others don't have, and so on. And it's been curious that a year ago we were getting, we'd easily get 20 people every 2 months come along to one of these courses. But then in the last 6 months or so, interest has really dropped right off, and we don't seem to be getting people coming to the courses anymore. And it's not entirely clear why. The only thing I can think of is maybe we've moved from a situation where people were buying EVs without a lot of maybe they were the first in their family or their circle of friends or whatever. And maybe we've moved to a point that now the people buying them already have a friend or neighbour or relative who's got one. And so perhaps they don't feel they need the course we're offering, and because they've got someone to talk to anyway. it's a bit hard to know. We're sort of a little bit puzzled by that one.
No, excellent. Do you think it's because maybe I know that there are incentives in ACT where you can like up to $15,000 that was interest free as such. Do you think that maybe is one of those factors that like not causing people to like try to get into an EV as such because the incentive is not strong enough at the moment, and also with the strong hybrid sales outstripping EVs as such? I know you've made comments of that going forward. Do you think it's a mixture of this and that kind of thing?
I think there's, well, I mean, we're still getting more EVs sold this year than last year. Until last year, the numbers were doubling every single year and had been for pretty much a decade. But this year, while the numbers have increased, they haven't doubled. They've just gone up a bit. And yes, hybrids seem to be taking off. I suspect some of that is the people buying the hybrids are essentially the much more conservative buyers who, wouldn't have even thought of the hybrid a year or two ago. They think they're doing something sort of a bit exciting and a little bit different, when they're buying something, the Prius came out in the late 90s. So, it's hardly new, and it's, a plain ordinary hybrid is hardly a new and exciting thing, but I think there's a bunch of people who are really conservative, and so that's what they're buying now. Why there's so I think that accounts for hybrid sales going up at the expense of just plain ordinary petrol cars. It doesn't really seem to be being taken away from EV sales. It's more being taken away from petrol sales. But, it's a pity that those people didn't sort of go the whole hog and end up in an EV.
No, definitely. And you think the ACT government's doing enough at this stage? Because, with them, with the dealerships as well, because we tend to with our NT government, we tend to catch up with them every now and then to talk to see if there's any sort of incentives. At the moment, we've got certain incentives that, with the with our fringe benefits, of course, was leasing as such at this stage, and also was getting people, with the registration, being halved as such. Do you think the ACT government's doing enough at this stage?
I think they're doing pretty well, frankly. So we did have free rego for a couple of years, which has just finished. However, that's been replaced by an emissions-based registration. So there's different emissions categories. So if it's a zero emissions vehicle, then there's still a registration amount, but it's half as much as if it was a higher emitting petrol car or diesel. So there's a sliding scale where there is registration to be paid, but it's nonetheless more expensive as you move up through categories of higher and higher emissions rating. So, and 15% interest-free loan is pretty good, and the prices for EVs have come down. You can buy yourself a good EV for less than the price of a Corolla. So, in a way, I think the areas that government can help with is probably more in things like encouragement for sort of visibility of charging and that kind of thing.
No, definitely. We always tend to talk to our government to see if we can start to do more charges off the beaten track down at Kakadu or going down to Litchfield National Park. That's the two things that we try to push when we go see the government as such.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that is an important message to get across is for anyone who's got an ordinary detached house where they can charge at home, public charging is something you do anywhere except at home. In Canberrans who have anyone who can charge at home and lives in Canberra isn't really going to use public charging in Canberra. Why would they? They can charge at home. Charging is something that I use everywhere except at home.
No, exactly there, Peter. It's the same like us too. We charge it at home. I've got a level 2 charger on my wall, so I'll never go and use the fast chargers. But if I need to use the fast chargers when I go outside of Darwin, I'll definitely use those fast chargers going forward. Some initiative, like I noticed that you, a few months ago talked about towing, because myself and Ricky, we're not really know about EVs and towing as such. Can you give us a little bit about that, about your experience with EVs and towing?
Yeah. So I've got an Ioniq 5 and it's got a 1.6 ton tow rating. But what I'm actually towing is a Jayco camper trailer, which is, the sort where the roof winds up and then beds push out each end. And I think that's the kind of camper that is going to become more popular with EVs, because trying to tow a conventional caravan that's in a high unaerodynamic box, that really would have a sort of very drastic effect on range and so on. And you'd end up having a very expensive tow vehicle because with that kind of caravan, you'd be throwing away more than half your range. So you'd end up having to have a huge amount of battery capacity that you don't need most of the time, and it would make the vehicle heavy and expensive. Whereas this packs down to lower than the roof of the car, so it's quite a bit more aerodynamic, and it only knocks about a third off our range. So we go from having over 400 kilometres on the highway down to so just under 300 kilometres of range. And that works fine. We've done a few camping trips. The most recent one, we went essentially due south from Canberra to the East Gippsland coast. That's sort of the far east Victoria. And some of the time we were in caravan parks where we had powered sites. And in that case, during the time we were staying, we could trickle charge the car from the powered site. But we always plugged the camper into the powered site 15 amp socket, and then we plugged the car into the 10 amp outlet on the camper trailer. And then that way no one can sort of point at us and say, hey, you're doing something naughty. Instead, all they see is, well, there's one cord going into one outlet that you've paid for, and that's your camper connection. So we had, we could charge up during the course of a stay. We could go and do excursions each day, and that would work fine. And then when we were moving on, we could leave and move on to the next place comfortably, having charged right back up. Then that reduces the amount of charging you need to do on the road. But the other way that we tried out was we had 3 nights where we were camping in a national park that was off-grid. And in that case, we had the cabling the other way around. We had the 15 amp V2L outlet from the car going into the camper trailer. And that meant that we could run the lights and use our induction cooktop and run the fridge in the camper trailer and had a toaster and a microwave and all that sort of thing. And we could camp exactly the same as we would at a powered site at a caravan park. And that was using about 10% out of our battery each day from the car. And it was less than 40 kilometres down the road, there was a DC charger in the nearest, reasonably sized town. So in principle, we could have stayed camping off grid indefinitely, just with a once a week run into town to recharge the battery. And we basically could have stayed off grid as long as we liked. That was good to try and worked very nicely.
This is the NT EV podcast. Bonus bit.
And with these, like the infrastructure and everything going camping, have you tried to like find more camping spots? Was the actual, you don't get any range anxiety at the moment, was having the towing something like a caravan as such going to these camping spots at the moment? The infrastructure is quite good over in ACT and beyond?
Getting to the camping sites, there's sort of DC charging is reasonably common around the place. So on the way from Canberra down to Victoria on this recent trip, it was just under 400 kilometres on the first day heading south, and then it was, I think, about 430 coming home, and which was also uphill. And we did 2 charges on the way down with 2 charges on the way back. We could actually have done both trips, both ways with just a single charge without needing that second charge. But, that would have been cutting it fine. And instead, we just did 2 partial charges in both directions, and it was really quite easy.
No, excellent. Which is great because we want to try to, have more facilities up here. It's probably not like infrastructure-wise in Northern Territory. We just got to like put more charges in places that we need to go to, especially with towing as such. It's a good mystery question as well at this stage, but we're getting better and better. But notice that you were on an ABC story before businesses rushed to install EV chargers to keep tourists coming back. Have you found like going forward from there, have you seen more and more people putting chargers in now and getting people coming to their businesses as such?
There's always sort of, another winery or a cafe somewhere or whatever that has some charging. I don't know how successful it is at attracting people now, especially as the towns are now putting in more DC charging along the way. I think where destination charging is particularly useful is where people stay overnight, because, and this is one of the things that we emphasise in All About EV course that our local AEVA branch runs. It's because a lot of people who've got EVs don't really seem to think about this, is if you book somewhere where you can charge overnight, then you can be charged up in the morning, charge up to 100% and then leave. And that's charging you don't have to do on the road. And, you can charge slowly while you sleep. And it's, so I think having, AC charging at, hotels and motels and so on is probably the most useful kind of destination charging.
Excellent. And also with the, I know that the ACT was doing some trialings with the RFID cards, was AEVA ACT. Can you tell me how's that going, how that was brought up, initiative to bring that in, and how's it going this stage with having that RFID card for, trying to use it for all different multifunctional fast chargers as such, all different brands out there?
Yeah, so, that was an idea that came out of a member in our branch, and there's one of the sort of misconceptions that people sort of quite often had was that you needed to have a branded RFID card to go with every single different EV charger. So whether it was EV or ChargeFox or all of various other brands, people sort of thought they ended up needing to have a dozen different RFID cards. And what we pointed out was, you don't need to get one from any of those people. You could have one AEVA card, and all the card is doing is transmitting the unique number on the front of the card to the charger, and then that uniquely identifies you if you have put that number into the app that you've got on your phone. So rather than having to fiddle around with an app, and possibly get stuck because your app isn't working because you're in some location where you're not getting good reception anyway. So long as you've put the number that goes with that RFID card into the app before you started your trip, then all you got to do is just pull out this one card, tap it regardless of which brand you've got, which charger brand you're at, and then you can get them all to work, and it's quicker and easier than fiddling around with your phone.
No, exactly. I think it's a great initiative as such, especially we don't have too many like charging brands up here. When it got like EV and the NRMA as such. We have sometimes we do have a couple of our members mention about it, but like of course you probably don't need to have the card as such. It is only $5 plus posting for us to grab. So we always will be happy to.
It's certainly worth having. I mean, ultimately, you would hope that it becomes redundant because. People who've got Teslas and are using Tesla chargers have been used to this for years, where you just plug the car in, and as soon as you plug the cord in, the Tesla charger recognizes the car and knows who you are and knows which account with Tesla to bill. But now EV has started doing that with most of their chargers. I think about 80% of them have the right hardware in them to be able to do this. So I now can just plug my car in as an EV charger, and it will just start up automatically. It recognizes that my car is the one that goes with my account, and then it will just start charging straight away, just the same as Teslas have always done at Tesla chargers. And hopefully over time, all the other brands will start doing the same thing. And then, RFID cards will become a thing of the past. And you just, the only then you don't need the RFID card or the app to get charging started. You'd really only use it to monitor your charging while you've wandered off to the cafe.
Excellent. That's a great initiative as such with the RFID card, but hopefully it will be like a tap and go sort of system, make it easy for everybody. Another note for that is, I noticed you touched on like charging etiquette. We've had issues like, people parking, not charging at all, just parking a nice vehicle in there, being a bit naughty, going to Darwin Entertainment Centre, and blocking charges. How have you found it recently over there?
I haven't run into that problem myself. It is on this recent trip to Victoria, there was one instance of one of the charging locations. There were 3 chargers to use, and one of them had just been swapped over and for an old model and it wasn't actually up and running yet. And then a second one was in use. And then there was a third one where someone was sitting there at 96% and had left a note to say that they intended to stay there for 2 hours. And this was on a 350 kilowatt charger that would have my car up to 80% in less than 20 minutes. So, it was kind of a bit rude to be just sitting there for 2 hours. Because, any car would have been charged up to, well over 80% in an hour on that charger. And, fortunately there was another, the person using the other charger, finished up pretty much, shortly, within 5 minutes or so when I arrived. It wasn't a problem, but that's really the only time I've really come across someone who's, in this case, it was an EV driver, not an ICE vehicle sitting there for much longer than was reasonable.
Nice. And do you think we should maybe have some sort of signs saying, what the rules are, or introduce something, going forward, because there'll be more and more people, investing in electric vehicles as such. Do you think there's some sort of polite messaging might be the way to go?
I think there's probably I think it's one of those things that'll just sort of happen naturally. It'll just diffuse out. There's enough discussion about EV etiquette anyway, I think, in, various EV groups and so on. So I think people will see it, and there'll be enough people, like that person who was there for 2 hours, there was probably someone going to be there tapping their toes who'd, hopefully firmly but politely explain the etiquette to them, when they got back and that person had been waiting. So I think people will sort of fairly quickly come to understand it, just in the same way that nobody, drives into a petrol station and then just leaves their car in front of the Bowser blocking access. So I think it'll tend to happen organically.
Excellent, yeah. And is there anything else you'd like to share what you're going in towards 2025 with AEVA ACT? With us, we're just trying to get it ready to do our NT launch as such, and just trying to introduce ourselves with our government and councils as such. What's happening on the fold with ACT going forward?
There's a bit of sort of policy work, because being in Canberra, we have sort of a little bit easier access to some of the federal politicians. So some of the time there's been opportunities for some of our executives to go to meetings with some of the federal senators and that sort of thing. So there's been, I guess, just even when it's happening with letters, we tend to have a bit more of a federal focus here, particularly since our local government's very sympathetic in any case. So we've got that dual focus. And our local government is kind of both the local it's the second and third tier of government rolled into one. So they're both the local council and the sort of territory government in the same body. I guess we do a little bit more on the sort of federal front. I guess it's something that would be a difference. We've paid attention to things like the National Construction Code. That was something we were working on last year with National AEVA, contributing to that, so that now for new apartment blocks, the National Construction Code says that there's a degree of EV readiness that's required for 100% of the parking spaces. Their initial draft had only said 20%, and we pointed out, well, that's useless, because how do you determine which 20% are going to be the lucky 20% for something that's part of the common property? It's got to be 100% or nothing. Then there's the fuel efficiency standard, and keeping a close eye on that, because there's car importers who are furiously lobbying to make sure that gets watered down and not extended and so on. So we're keeping a close eye on that one. Just a personal interest of mine has been also how things are in sort of strata development, so apartment blocks and sets of townhouses and so on. And that came out of the fact that I lived in a set of townhouses where most of our residents can't park right up at their unit. Instead, we're parking in shared parking areas that for most of us are away from our unit, just a short distance down a footpath, but too far away to be able to charge from our own unit. Within our set of townhouses, we've got an EV charging policy to say how EV charging can be gradually added to our common area parking spaces. And having sort of thought about how to do it where I am, I've come to realise just how diverse different strata situations are, that there isn't a single best solution, that every block of flats or set of townhouses should do it this way. There are things that perhaps the ideal way to do it in one place they just wouldn't work at all in a different place. It really requires somebody in each sort of townhouses to really, or apartment block, to really get their head around some technical detail to just work out what's going to work for their place. And not just on the technical level, it's also what's going to work sort of within sort of the local politics of that set of, that strata development. Would there be an appetite for kind of doing it all at once, getting an installation in place that covers everybody, or alternatively, would you never get agreement to do that? And instead, the way to go is to have a gradual, rolled out, incremental plan where you can not hold back the early adopters, but at the same time, you don't need to get the people who don't see themselves in an EV for a very long time. You don't need to get those people on board parting with any money straight away. And so, but you nonetheless don't give away all of your electrical charging capacity to those first few early adopters. You bear in mind that the supply capacity to the building is a shared resource that has to be shared equitably. So you work out what is the way that you can avoid holding up the early adopters, but also have an incremental planned rollout that will eventually be able to be shared equitably among everybody. And it's really quite tricky, and it's not the same answer for every different for every place. It's really does require quite a lot of thought.
No, exactly. Because recently I dropped into the AEVA South Australia branch when they did their talks with the SN networks, and they were just doing trials with the light pole charging as such. Is that something that could help?
Yeah. Look, I think, I know people who are coping with where they can't charge at home, and where they are coping with public charging. And this is an important message, I guess, for local governments as well, is for them to understand that in some places, what you really need is fast DC charging and quick turnaround and so on. But then there are other places where you'd be better off with having lots and lots of relatively inexpensive slow charging. So, for example, where we are, we have, in the ACT, we've got places where there's car parks where cars are left all day, because people drive to those park and ride car parks and then hop onto public transport and then use that to get into the city and go to work, and they're at work all day, and then they go back on a bus or a train and get back to that park and ride car park. And their car could have just been slowly trickle charging all day, soaking up all the solar electricity generated in the surrounding suburbs. Using the electricity during the day when there's very little load out in the suburbs, and that could be the best solution rather than putting in one or two really fast chargers. It's a matter of knowing what's the right kind of charger for the different locations.
Great perspective as such, it's good insight what you talked about there, and see where we can go going forward. And just on a last note, what's the numbers like at the moment of 2024 in over in ACT, and also what do you see the numbers going to be like in 2025 going forward? So
just this week, literally on 2 days ago, we hit 10,000 EVs registered in the ACT, which is pretty much 3% of the total registered cars in the ACT. Look, my guess is that next year will be bigger. We'll follow the trend this year. So this year, registrations were up a little bit on last year, but they weren't doubling, which is what they had been doing for years before that. So for 10 years, we doubled every year. I think we're 8 or 10% more than we were the year before, but we didn't double. And I suspect that next year will be fairly similar, that, we might end up, 20% more than we were this year. So, numbers will continue growing, but just perhaps not growing quite as quickly as they had been. I think things might pick up again. I think this year might have been the smallest rate of increase, and then things will pick up again. There's got to be, we're going to reach a tipping point at some point where, and I think it'll be hard to predict exactly when it is, but there'll be some point when just suddenly it somehow seeps out into kind of collective imagination or whatever, that people suddenly think, I'm not going to buy another petrol car. Why would I do that? And I even think it might take people by surprise when it just suddenly expectations or plans flip. Just suddenly one year it's like, oh yeah, I don't want one of those petrol cars anymore. And but when that happens, whether that's 2028 or 2035 or whenever, but when it does happen, I think it could take people by surprise.
No, fascinating information that you got there, Peter, and I really appreciate the time as well, telling us about Canberra and ACT and electric vehicles as such.
Yeah, I'm happy to chat.